He was on the north ridge before first light, which was where he preferred to be when something needed thinking through. The horse moved without being asked. Elias Marsh had ridden this trail long enough that the animal knew it as well as he did. The place where the limestone shelf went soft and required slowing. The gap in the scrub cedar where the wind came through a different way. The long flat stretch before the ridge dropped and the land opened below into what was his. 40 acres of grass, 12 of plowed ground, the creek running copper in the early light. The house that he had built himself, room by room, over 6 years, with lumber he had hauled from Abilene before the railroad changed which towns mattered. He had come up to check on the cattle that had drifted north in the heat. That was the practical reason. He had also come because the house was loud in the mornings now, in the way houses are loud when 2 children are trying to exist in them before anyone is ready, and because some problems required the open air and the quiet before they became any clearer. May at 7 had not yet learned that mornings were different from the rest of the day. Thomas at 12 had learned it, but declined to apply it. Between them by 7 o'clock, the house had a density to it that required dispersal. He did not resent it. He had spent enough time in silence to know that the loud kind of mornings were preferable to the other kind. The kind that had settled over the house 2 years back when his wife had gotten sick fast and died faster and left him with 2 children and a farm and an instruction he had not asked for but could not argue with, which was to continue. He had continued. One day at a time, in the way that was the only way such a thing could be done. The problem he had been turning over was Gerald Foss and the eastern parcel. It was not a new problem. It had started the previous winter, when Foss had appeared in his doorway with papers that he held the way a man holds something he has been waiting to produce, and had said things about survey lines and creek boundaries and county filings in the tone of a man who had rehearsed it. Elias had listened. He had said he would look into it. He had looked into it, and found nothing that supported what Foss was claiming, and had said so. And Foss had smiled the smile of a man who had expected that answer and had more to say after it. There had been 3 conversations since then. They had the same shape each time. Foss held papers. Elias said what was true. Foss smiled. Elias had eventually asked directly what the eastern parcel had to do with a man he had never done business with and had no grievance against. He had asked it the way he asked most things, without embellishment, expecting a plain answer. What he got instead was the thing underneath the thing. Foss had wanted to buy land on the east side of the creek 3 years prior, before Elias had expanded his own claim to include it. He had made an offer to the previous owner, a man who had come out from Georgia with intentions that the territory had not cooperated with, and had been in the process of negotiating when Elias had made a better offer and the previous owner had taken it. Foss had never said this directly, but it was in the way the conversations went, the particular heat underneath the measured legal language, the sense that the papers were a structure built over something older and more personal. The land was not really what Foss wanted. What he wanted was to be the kind of man who had gotten what he went after, and Elias was in the way of that. He crested the ridge as the sky went from gray to something lighter, and he pulled up and let the horse stand and looked at the land below him and tried to hold on to the thing that made it worth the trouble. It was worth the trouble. He knew that. He had known it since he first saw it. A younger man on a borrowed horse, coming through the territory for the first time and stopping on this exact ridge and sitting there long enough that the horse had started to get opinions about it. The land had a quality to it that he had not been able to explain to his wife when she arrived, and could not explain now to anyone else either. It was the quality of a thing that had been here before everything else and would be here after. It asked nothing from you except that you not ruin it. He had tried not to ruin it. He was looking at the creek line, calculating where the cattle might have gone, when he saw the horse. It was standing in the shadow of a boulder about 30 yards off the trail, not grazing, not moving, in the particular stillness of an animal that had not been tied but had decided to stay anyway. He did not recognize it. It was a good horse, not young, with the confirmation of something bred for endurance rather than speed. There was a saddle on it, empty. He looked around the trail. Nothing moved. He got down from his horse and walked toward the boulder. The man was sitting against its base with his legs out in front of him and his back straight in the way of someone who is managing pain by not bending to it. He was old. Elias could see that before he could see anything else, the way age sits differently than any other kind of stillness. His hair was white at the temples and long, and he was wearing it loose. His clothes were not the clothes of the reservation. His hands were in his lap, and they were not near a weapon, and they were not raised either. They were simply there, in the way of a man who has used up most of what he had getting to where he was, and is now waiting to see what happens next. There was blood on his side, low, soaked through into the cloth. Not fresh, but not old. The kind of wound that has been traveling with a man for a day, maybe two. Elias stopped about 6 feet away and they looked at each other. The man's eyes were dark and clear and entirely without alarm, which was either calm or the particular stillness that comes when a person has gotten past the place where being alarmed would help anything. Elias was not sure which. He was not sure it mattered. He went back to his saddlebag and took out what he had. There was not much. A canteen, half full. A cloth he used for the horse's legs that was clean enough. A small tin with the practical contents of a man who rides alone. Matches, a bit of cord, a folded piece of oilskin. He took the canteen and the cloth and went back. He crouched down. He looked at the wound and then at the man, and then at the wound again. He said, without expecting an answer, that he was going to take a look at it, and then he did. It was a knife wound, he thought, though he had not seen enough of them to be entirely certain. Deep, but not into the cavity. The bleeding had slowed on its own, which was the best news there was. What it needed was cleaned and bound. He had the cloth and the water, and enough experience with injury, from farming and from the war before that, to do something that was better than nothing. He worked without talking, mostly. Occasionally, he said a word or two into the space between them, not directed at the man exactly, just present, the way you keep a sound going so the silence doesn't go wrong. He did not know if any of it was understood. He did it anyway. The man let him work without moving except once, when Elias pressed on something that cost him. And even then, what he did was not pull away, but simply become more still, in the way of someone absorbing a thing they have decided to absorb. When he had done what he could do, he sat back on his heels and looked at what he had accomplished, which was modest but real. He picked up the canteen and held it out. The man took it with both hands. He drank. He lowered it and looked at Elias with the same clear, measuring expression he had had from the beginning, as though he had been conducting an assessment this whole time and had now arrived somewhere. Elias stood. He looked at his rifle in the saddle scabbard, and then at the man against the boulder, and then at the distance between the man and his own horse, which was still standing 30 yards back, not going anywhere. He went to his horse. He took the rifle out of the scabbard. He walked back to the boulder, and he set it on the ground, within the man's reach, not handed, set down. The way you leave a thing for someone without making them ask for it. Then he went and caught the loose horse, which came to him without much persuasion, and he led it back and tied the reins loosely to the base of the boulder, where they could be reached from the ground. He looked at the man once more. The man looked at him. Something moved in his face, not large, not announced, the expression of a man who has been carrying a long estimation of something and has just been required to adjust it. Elias got back on his horse and rode on toward where the cattle had gone. He did not find them until late morning. They had drifted past the north fence line and into the scrub, the way they did when the heat came, and it took him the better part of 2 hours to move them back. By the time he came down off the ridge and through the east gate, it was past noon, and the sky had the white flatness of a day that intended to stay hot until it didn't. He was tired in the physical way of a man who has ridden since before dawn, and he was also tired in another way that was harder to name. The second kind was not new. It had been with him since his wife died, in varying degrees, the way certain injuries persist below the level of complaint, present, managed, not gone. He had done a thing on the ridge that he had not planned and had not considered beforehand, and could not have explained to anyone's satisfaction, including his own. He had seen a man who needed water, and had given him water. He had seen a man who could not ride safely without something to defend himself with, and had given him the means. These were not complicated acts. They did not require a philosophy. They required only that a person look directly at what was in front of them and do the thing that was indicated. He had done the thing that was indicated. He understood, as he came through the gate and saw the set of Thomas's shoulders at the fence, that the day was not done yet, which was his habit. He liked to have something in his hands when he was thinking. He looked up when his father came through the gate and looked at him the way he had been looking at him lately, with the particular attention of a 12-year-old who has decided to start reading people more carefully than he used to. Elias unsaddled the horse and put him up and went inside and drank 2 cups of water at the kitchen counter and thought about what to eat. May came in from the back room and said there was cornbread left, and he said that was fine, and she put it on the table and sat across from him and watched him eat with the focused attention she gave most things. She said after a moment that Cal had come by that morning. Elias said what had Cal wanted. May said he had come down the North Trail and seen an old Indian man with a rifle, and he had gone into town to tell people about it. Elias ate the cornbread and did not say anything. May said, with the precision of a child reporting facts she has not yet sorted into meaning, that Cal had told Mr. Aldrich, and Mr. Aldrich had told 2 other people, and she did not know who else, because she had stopped listening at that point. Elias said she had done right to stop listening. She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. He knew what it meant, Cal telling people. He knew how a town received that kind of information, in pieces, reassembled in the wrong order, with the gaps filled by whatever each person needed to believe. By evening there would be a version of the morning that bore some resemblance to what had actually happened, and several versions that did not. Foss would hear it. Foss would do something with it, because Foss had a talent for taking any available material and building something useful to himself out of it. He sat with this for a while, and then he went back outside to finish what the afternoon required. In the days that followed, he heard the shape of what the town was saying, in the way you hear things without asking. It came to him, the way things come to men, who are known to be quiet, and therefore talked around, rather than to men who become accustomed to receiving information sideways. What he heard was that Foss had taken the story of the rifle and added it to his case about the eastern parcel, and that the case was now being told in the land office and at the feed store, and in at least 1 letter to someone in the county seat, with the argument being that a man who gave arms to hostile parties was not a man whose land claims should be treated as settled. He heard this and said nothing about it. He went to work. The farm in August was the farm it always was, not cruel, not easy, requiring the whole of your attention and then some more on top of it. He fixed the fence line on the south quarter that had been needing it since spring, working alone in the heat with the posts and the wire and the rhythm of it that required nothing from him except his body. He brought the cattle back from the north pasture and put them in the lower field. He walked the creek boundary on both sides, which he did twice a year, and noted what had changed. He put up the winter's wood in the evenings when the light allowed it, Thomas splitting beside him with the focused competence of a boy who had been watching how things were done long enough to start doing them with the same economy of motion, no wasted swings, the maul meeting the wood at the right angle every time now. It was good work. All of it was good work. He had noticed, in the 2 years since his wife died, that the farm had become his answer to most things. Not an escape. He was not a man who escaped things, but a location where the problem could be held alongside the daily requirement to keep living, and where sometimes, over the course of a day's physical work, the problem arranged itself differently and became something he could see around. The Foss problem did not arrange itself differently. It stayed the shape it was. A man who wanted what was his and had found a method that might work. He put up wood and thought about it without resolution and went inside when the light was gone. Thomas did not ask about the man on the ridge. He was 12, and he did not ask about the things that mattered most to him, because he had learned that the things that mattered most required more careful handling than a direct question allowed for. But one evening, splitting wood in the late light, he said without looking up that he had heard some of what people were saying in town. Elias set them all down. He said, "What had Thomas heard?" Thomas said he had heard that Foss was trying to take the eastern parcel and was using the rifle as a reason. Elias said that was mostly accurate. Thomas split a piece of wood and looked at the two halves and then set them on the pile. He said, still without looking up, that it seemed like a poor reason. Elias said it was. Thomas said then why. Elias thought about how to say it in a way that was true and not larger than it needed to be. He said that some men looked for reasons, and when a good one wasn't available, they used whatever was at hand. He said that Foss had wanted this land before he had it, and had not gotten it, and had not finished wanting it, and that was the real reason. And the rifle was just the most recent version of an argument that had been going on for 3 years. Thomas was quiet for a moment, working this into the shape of things he already understood. Then, he said he supposed the man on the ridge hadn't had anything to do with what Foss wanted. Elias said no, he hadn't. Thomas said that seemed like a poor trade for the rifle then, meaning for Foss. Elias said it was. He picked up the maul. He said that most poor trades made sense to the person making them at the time they were making them, and that this was what made them poor trades rather than just mistakes. Thomas considered this. He went back to splitting. After a while, he said he understood that. Elias believed him. The boy had been understanding things earlier than expected for most of his life. It was one of the things his mother had noticed first. The letter from the county arrived on a Tuesday. It required his appearance in Morrow to address the land claim before a specified date, or the claim would proceed without him. The date was 3 weeks out. He read the letter twice and set it on the kitchen table and left it there. He went outside and looked at the eastern parcel, the good grass, the creek at its eastern boundary, the land that had required 6 years of him and had given back what he had put into it. He stood at the fence line for a long time. In the weeks between the letter and the date, he went about what needed doing. There was always what needed doing. The farm did not stop requiring attention because a man had other things on his mind, and in some ways he was grateful for this, that the fence needed the post reset, and the north water trough needed recalking, and the seedbed for the winter wheat needed to be turned, and that these things were real and immediate, and had nothing to do with Gerald Foss. He also, in those weeks, rode out twice on trails he did not ordinarily take. The first time was north, along the ridge, past the boulder where the old man had been. He did not expect to find anyone there, and he did not. The ground showed what the ground shows, hoofprints, old ones, going east. The rifle was gone. The cloth he had used was folded and set on top of the boulder with the precision of someone who had done it deliberately. He looked at the folded cloth for a moment and then left it where it was. The second ride was further, into the broken country east of the creek, where the land changed character and became something older and less managed. Scrub and limestone and cedar, and the occasional dry wash that carried water in the spring and nothing in the summer. He rode slowly and without urgency. He was not sure what he was looking for. He was not sure he was looking for anything. He was simply present in the territory, in the way of a man who has something to settle, and has chosen to settle it by being seen. The land out here was different from his land. It did not ask anything from you because you were not yet part of its calculation. It had its own time, older than the county, and older than the town, and older than the arguments men like Foss made with papers. He rode through it and felt the difference in his horse, who moved more carefully here, more alert, reading the land the way horses read things they have not yet decided about. He turned back when the light began to change. He did not see anyone. He rode back. He did not know what he had expected exactly. Not a conversation. The territory did not work that way, not anymore, if it ever had. Not a sign of the kind a man could point to and explain to someone else. He had ridden out because it was the only honest thing he could do with the question the morning on the ridge had left in him, which was not a question with a clean answer, but rather the kind that settled slowly into the way you understood something. You could not rush it. You could only keep riding and let the land do what it did, which was to give you enough quiet to hear what you were thinking. What he thought, riding back in the fading light, was that he had done the right thing. Not because the outcome had been good. The outcome was still undecided, but because it was the only answer to what he had seen in that man's face at the base of the boulder, which was not a request and not a demand, but simply the plain fact of a person in the middle of something they had not planned and could not manage alone. You did not need a philosophy for that. You needed your hands and your canteen and whatever you could spare. The morning of the day he was due in town, he was up before the children. He made coffee and drank it at the kitchen table in the dark and thought about what was coming with the same plain attention he gave practical problems. Foss had papers. The papers were probably not airtight. He had his own, properly filed, properly surveyed, witnessed and dated and filed in triplicate the way the county required. But in the county office of a small Texas town, the question of what was airtight could sometimes be influenced by who was in the room and who had been in the room more often. Foss had been in the room more than he had. He had been farming while Foss had been building relationships with county associates, which was a different kind of work and one he had never been inclined toward. He was inclined toward it now, in the sense that he wished he had been. He thought about the folded cloth on top of the boulder. The precision of it, not left in a heap, not dropped, but folded and placed. The precision of a man who had wanted to be understood. He thought about this for a while, and then he got up and went out to start the morning chores before the children woke, because the morning chores did not wait, and because moving was better than sitting with the thing he could not yet see the shape of. He came down the main street, and the town had the particular quality of a town that has been waiting. The way people find reasons to be on their porches and near their front windows and in their doorways when something is expected. He recognized this without acknowledging it. He tied his horse in front of the land office. He went inside. Foss was already there. He had 2 men with him, men Elias recognized as county associates of some kind, and he had the papers in the same hand, at the same shoulder height that he always had them. He looked at Elias with the prepared expression of a man who had arranged the room to his advantage. The proceeding lasted 40 minutes. It had the quality of something that had been engineered, documents produced in a sequence, questions asked in an order, objections met with the calm of a man who has anticipated them. Elias produced his own papers, his survey, his filing, his deed, the correspondence with the county office from 4 years prior, confirming the boundary. He laid them on the table one at a time without drama. Foss's man looked at them and said there were questions about the creek boundary that superseded the earlier filing. Elias said the creek boundary was in the original survey and had not changed. Foss said that the original survey had been conducted by a man who was no longer in business and whose work was being reviewed. Elias said the work had been accepted by the county office at the time, and that acceptance was on record. This went back and forth for a while, in the manner of legal proceedings everywhere. The same ground covered from different angles, the same points made and deflected, the whole thing moving toward a conclusion that everyone in the room could feel approaching, but that required the formal structure to reach. And then the room changed. It changed because of a sound that came from outside, from the street, and that brought one of Foss's men to the window, and then the other one, and then Foss himself, setting his papers down on the table with the first uncontrolled motion Elias had seen from him. Elias did not go to the window immediately. He looked at the documents on the table, his and Foss's both, and he straightened his own stack and set it aside, and then he went to the window and looked. The street was full, not full in the way of a market day or a gathering, full in the way of something that had arrived with intention. They came from the East Road, which was the direction of the ridge and the broken country beyond it, and they came in the unhurried manner of people who are not trying to get somewhere quickly, but are making a point about how many of them there are. Comanche, most of them, on horses that were good horses, trail-seasoned, reading the town the way horses read unfamiliar places. Some he could not place with the same certainty. Other nations, or men who had been moving through the territory long enough that the categories had blurred. They came into the street and they stopped, and they did not do anything except exist in considerable number in plain sight, in the full light of mid-morning, in front of every window and porch in Morrow. The town on its porches and at its windows went entirely still. Elias counted instinctively, the way you count things that matter, and stopped when the counting stopped being useful. There were more than he had expected. Many more. They extended back down the East Road further than the window allowed him to see, and the ones still coming around the bend were still coming. He stood at the window for a long moment and understood what he was looking at. He was looking at what a thing costs, paid back. He was looking at what it means when you set a rifle on the ground and walk away and trust the space you have left. He was looking at what an old man on a good horse had gone back and said to people, in whatever language the saying happened in, and what those people had decided to do about it. He had not asked for this. He had not expected it. He was not sure, standing at the window of the Morrow Land Office on a Tuesday morning in late summer, that he fully understood it, but he understood enough. He turned back to the room. Foss was at the window with a color in his face that Elias had not seen on him before. His two associates were behind him, and they had the quality of men who had just revised their estimates of several things at once. Elias went back to the table. He picked up Foss's papers, and he looked at them carefully, which he had not been given adequate time to do before. He read them the way he read survey lines, looking for where the measurement stopped being precise. He found it in the third document. A reference to a marker stake that the original survey had not placed where Foss's document said it had been placed. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that required attention to catch. He set the document down and put his finger on the line and looked at Foss. Foss had come back to the table. He was looking at the street through the window in the manner of a man trying to calculate something while the numbers kept moving. Elias said plainly that the marker stake described in the third document was not where the third document said it was, and that he could show anyone who wanted to see it where it actually was. He said this without raising his voice and without looking at the window. The county associate who had been running the proceeding looked at the document and then at Foss and then at the document again. Foss said without looking away from the street that there may have been an error in the transcription. Elias said there may have been. He waited. The room was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of a room in which a thing has ended but has not yet been acknowledged as ended. Outside, the street held its weight. No one moved out there. No one made a sound that came through the walls. Foss picked up his papers. He squared them against the table. He looked at Elias with the expression of a man who has lost something and is trying to decide whether to acknowledge that he knows it. And then he looked back at the window, and whatever decision he had been weighing resolved itself into something else entirely. He said to the county associate that it seemed there were questions about the documentation that required further review before the claim could proceed. The county associate said he believed that was correct. Foss gathered his papers and went out. Elias watched him go. Then he gathered his own papers and folded them into his coat and thanked the county associate. who looked relieved in the way of a man who had not known exactly what he had been drawn into until he was already in it. He went outside. The light was high and flat. The street held its population of horses and riders, still patient, in no particular formation, and with no apparent leader visible. The town on its porches and at its windows had not moved. Elias stood on the step of the land office and looked at the street. He looked for a long time. He was looking for one face in particular, and he did not find it. And then he looked again more carefully and found it at the edge of the gathered riders, near the back, not prominently placed, not at the front where the town could see it, but there, an old man on a good horse, straight-backed, in the way of someone managing the memory of an injury, watching with the same clear, measuring expression that Elias remembered from the morning on the ridge. Their eyes met. Elias held the old man's gaze for a moment. He did not nod. He did not raise his hand. He simply looked. In the way you look at a person you have reached some understanding with that does not require elaboration. The old man looked back at him in the same way. Then, without any visible signal, the riders began to turn. Slowly, in the unhurried manner they had arrived, they moved back toward the east road. The street reappeared behind them in degrees. The town, on its porches and at its windows, watched them go. The old man went with them and did not look back. Elias stood on the step until the last of them had cleared the street. Then he untied his horse and got on and rode east toward home. It was early afternoon when he came through the gate. Thomas was in the yard and looked up and looked at him with the assessment that he applied to most things, reading whatever the ride home had left on his father's face. The assessment did not take long. Whatever he found satisfied him. Elias unsaddled the horse and put him up. He came out of the barn and stood in the yard for a moment with the feeling of a man who has been carrying something a long way and has set it down and is not yet sure what to do with the hands. The yard was the same as it had been that morning. The fence was the same. The eastern parcel beyond the fence was the same. The grass going yellow at the edges now with the season. The creek line visible as a darker thread through the middle distance, catching the afternoon light the way it always did. It was his. The papers in his coat said so. The county associate had said so. The street full of riders had said so in a different language, one that required no translation. Thomas came over. He stood beside him in the way of someone who has decided the moment deserves company, without requiring conversation. He looked at the eastern parcel the same way his father was looking at it. He said, without asking anything, that it looked like it had stayed. Elias said it had. Thomas nodded. He had the expression of someone who had not doubted this, but was glad to have it confirmed. He went back to his piece of wood and his whittling, and did not make anything more of it, which was exactly right. May came around the side of the house with something she had found that required immediate examination, and began explaining what it was with the full energy of a person who has been saving this explanation for the right moment and has now found it. Elias listened. He answered the questions she hadn't asked yet before she got to them, which was a game she did not know they were playing, and she laughed when he got it right, the way she always laughed, entirely, without reserve, as though laughter were not a limited resource and there was no reason to ration it. The sound went out across the yard and the field and the creek and the land that was still, by the end of that day, his. He went to hang up his coat and start on what the evening required. Behind him the house held its warmth. The light moved across the floor in the way it moved in the late afternoon. From the western window, slow and flat and long, the kind of light that finds whatever is on the table and makes it worth looking at. The land outside the window was still and clear. It did not ask anything from him tonight except that he come back tomorrow and keep not ruining it. He intended to. If this story stayed with you, leave a word below. That's all it takes.